Take our shutter speed back up. Let's see what we get. Okay, I still like our perspective. The product's much cleaner. I think that we need to rotate it just a little bit because I'm not getting the full left side of the product here. We can hardly tell what's on that left side. So I'm just going to turn our stand just a little bit underneath. And we'll try this again. Better. Now I can see both business sides of the product, both sides of the product that have stuff on them, which is important. So now we need to worry about lighting. I think the light behind the product is a little too bright. It's blowing out our product a little bit back there, and we're not getting a nice definitive edge on that. The other thing I'm noticing is that our focus is falling off as it gets towards the back of the product, and I think we're going to want to stop our aperture down just a little bit to add some depth of field. So I'm going to go from f8 to f11 to start with and see if that does it for us. Now, because I've changed our aperture, which regulates the amount of light that can reach our sensor in relation to the flash power, I'm also going to need to adjust the flash power to make up for that increase in aperture. So I'm going to head back behind here and do that. All right, so I've taken my flash up to full power. I was at half. One stop from that is going to be full power. So I'm at maximum output for that flash. It may be too much. Let's take a shot and see where we are. And I think it is. It's completely washing out the surface of our product, which, as I said before, is one of the things we want to be very careful about when we're photographing products that we know are going to be KO'd. We want to have a definitive edge on that product. All right, so I've taken our flash down to half power and I moved it just a little bit to camera right. My goal is to try to bring a little bit of gradient from the rear corner towards the front. It'll help add some interest to this product. Again, I'm hoping that by reducing the power to half power from full power, it'll help bring out the definitive edge so that we can knock out this product in post. The way that we knock out the product in post is making a selection around it, either with the pen tool or one of the other selection tools in Photoshop, and I'll demonstrate that when we get into the post-processing for this. But if you don't have that clean edge, you're going to have a very hard time making that selection. It's going to select wrong areas of the product, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly where that edge is if you don't have that definitive edge. So we'll really concentrate on that here. That's one of the biggest issues we need to work with, especially when we're using flash photography, because it's very easy to wash out a particular edge of a subject. Okay, so there's our next shot. I'm really liking the gradient that we're getting across the surface of this product, but I'm not liking the highlight that we're getting on that back edge. So I think I'm going to adjust the rear light positioning just a little bit more. Now you'll notice I haven't moved this flash forward or back at all, and if I do that, it's going to give me a bigger spread of light across the surface of this diffusion panel. As I light this diffusion panel, it actually becomes my light source, not this flash back here. So my light source as the flash hits is probably somewhere in this range right now. If I back up, I can turn this entire diffusion panel into one giant light source, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep this kind of a sexy gradient running across the top of this product. So very minor adjustments to our lighting can make a huge difference when we're dealing with tabletop products like this. That's better. Still not exactly where I want to be. I think I'm going to move it just a little bit more. And now that we're starting to get dialed in here, I think I'm going to start trying to trigger this from the iPad. That way we're sure not to move the camera in case we need to do some compositing of some sort. What I mean by compositing is taking multiple exposures of a product and lighting for different pieces of that product and then combining them in post. I'm not planning on having to do that for this particular shoot. I want to save that for a later demonstration in the tutorial, but I want to think about it nonetheless. You see I can fire this from the iPad and I don't even have to put my hands on the camera, which is incredible technology. That's better. It's still a little bright on that back edge, so I can either turn the power down, I can stop my camera down a little bit, or I can try to reposition the lighting even more. Let me check my depth of field and make sure that we're sharp all the way through. We're not quite sharp all the way through, so I think in this situation, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my aperture down just a little bit more. It'll give us a little bit more depth of field, and it should help us eliminate some of the real bright parts of this, what this flash is doing to our subject. So let's go from f11 to, let's go 2/3 of a stop to f14. Better. I think we can go just a little bit more. And I think that's better. We're getting a nice definitive edge. We're very close to being sharp all the way through the product. I'm more concerned with the front business edge being in focus and tack sharp, because that's the part with all the elements that we need to show in the photograph to sell this product. We got the most interesting portions of the product to light still. We have some, looks like a flashlight on this side. There's the connection for our jumper cables on this side. We have a power input, a battery indicator, some buttons, USB ports. We need to be able to show all that because that's what this product's really all about. With the Surface, we have the brand of the product, the brand name of the product, or the model name of the product, and we can see that fine here. I'm okay with the way the top of the product looks with this gradient. We're going to get a little more light on this end of the product once we start to bring light in from the left side and the front of the product. We can always select the logo in post. It's very easy to make a selection on something like this because there's a huge contrast between the color of that logo and the color of the product. We can make a selection for that orange tone and just saturate it just a tad in post if we need to, or even bring up the exposure of that logo in post if we need to, so that it really jumps off of the product. We don't want to make it unbelievable, but it's our job to enhance and make these things look as good as possible. On that note, it's not uncommon to get products from clients to photograph that are either prototypes or they just pull off the shelf and they don't think about what they're going to look like in camera. If you have the opportunity, I strongly encourage you to mention to your clients to give you the cleanest products they have. What I mean by clean is the less imperfections, blemishes, and things like that. I recently shot for a company doing a whole bunch of gas caps. They got gas caps for any kind of car you can possibly think of. And he just went in his inventory and started pulling them all off the shelf. Well, as we got them in front of the camera, almost every single one of them had blemishes, either from manufacturing or from boxing it up or just being handled roughly. So that means more time in post. We got to go through and we got to fix all those imperfections because the client expects to get the product back from a professional photographer and have it look absolutely perfect. Well, the more time I spend in post fixing those imperfections, the more I have to charge the client because my time isn't free. So you're actually doing them a favor by having them spend the time in advance and pick out the best looking products that they possibly can. That's not always possible when you're shooting with prototypes because the prototype is just that. It's a rough model of what the final product is going to look like. So when that happens, a lot of times we just have to work in enough budget to be able to spend the proper time in post to get rid of those blemishes and make the product look absolutely perfect like it would as a final product. All right, so again, I got two options to light these dark sides of this product. I can either add an additional flash from this side and bring some light in, or I can try to use bounce cards. Because this is the first time that we're using flash, I think that I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. One of the things that we want to be concerned with when we're shooting with flash photography, whether it's in a studio or in your home or whatever, is the other ambient light influences that are there. In the studio, I have overhead lights, we've got video lights in here, we've got all things on because we're doing this tutorial. You're probably not going to have video lights in your home office or your studio or whatever place that you're shooting, but you might have a lot of daylight pouring in, you might have recessed lights in the ceiling or fluorescent lights, all of that stuff can influence your capture if they're really bright. We're using 1/25 of a second shutter speed, and we could probably go faster. I'm not sure exactly what the native sync speed is for this camera. I'm guessing it's about 200th of a second. It is for most modern cameras. And that's gonna kill just about all the ambient light we could possibly have in our scene. But that's not to say that if you're shooting in a bedroom or an office or something that has very strong sunlight coming in from the window, that it wouldn't still be enough to at least influence your shot. And when I say influence, I mean it could add light to the shot or even add a color cast in your shot, which you're gonna have to try to get rid of later. So keep that in mind. You might wanna use some darkened curtains or throw a piece of foam core up to cover a window, or make sure you turn off your overhead lights or whatever you need to do to kill all that ambient light. Remember that we're triggering our first flash through a PocketWizard transmitter and receiver setup. So this other flash, I need to turn on to an optical slave so that when flash 1 fires, flash 2 will see that flash and instantly flash as well. And that allows us to use a single transmitter and receiver. There's absolutely no reason why I couldn't put a second receiver on the next flash. And a lot of times, if you're shooting in a place where there may be other cameras going off, or there may be other sorts of flash influence for some reason, it can trigger that optical slave and fire your flash unnecessarily. But in an environment like this, it's not really an issue. So I'm just gonna use the optical slave. Let me go turn that one on. Now I'm gonna set this flash to remote, which sets that optical slave active. And as far as power goes, I'm gonna start it at the same power as our other flash. We'll try it at half power. My guess is that it's probably gonna be too much, but we'll find out once we take our first shot. I'm also gonna have this flash a little bit lower than our other flash because I really don't need to light the top of the product as much. I'm more concerned with lighting the edges of the product. So I'm gonna have it lower on our diffusion panel. Now, I don't want to cast shadows on our product with the stuff that's on our table here. So I'm going to move these lenses off of our table and put them over here on my cart. All right. I'm looking at this product, and one of the things that I think I'm going to want to do, I talked about compositing a little bit earlier, and I wanted to try to keep this simple because this is the first time we're introducing flash, but I think this thing, we really need to show the LED lighting on the battery levels for this product. So I think we're gonna at least have to do that with a second exposure, and we'll get to that, but I'm just kind of verbalizing some of the stuff that I'm thinking about as I move through this shoot, and hopefully I can remember to come back and do that later. All right, so I've got that flash on. Let's test it and see if it's firing. It is. Okay, let's take a shot and see what happens. Okay, so we brought some light into the front side of this, and I'm really liking what it's doing. It's giving me a nice clean edge. I can see that there's a flashlight there, a little bulb. I can see the door for the jumper cables. I think that we can probably bring it up just a little bit more. And the way that I'm going to do that, because I don't need a nice big light source, is I'm just going to move this closer to my diffusion panel, this light back here, which will increase my power slightly. I'm liking what this front edge is doing now. It's brought up the exposure of that edge. I can really get a good idea of what that edge is offering us. The problem is I have this ugly glare at the joint between the top surface and the side surface. There's a couple ways I can try to get rid of that. I don't mind having a little bit of highlight there because it gives us a definitive difference between what the two surfaces are and where they meet. When you're shooting an object like this, whether it's a tabletop product or whether it's a building, if you have two edges that meet, you want to have some sort of contrast at those edges. You want to have a light meeting a dark, and that's really going to help you see the differences between the two edges so it doesn't just look like one big flat surface. I like the highlight, I think it's too much. So we can try to either put a polarizer on the lens and knock that down some, which is probably also gonna affect some of the other light on the product, or I can try to flag it with one of the dots or fingers that I showed you in an earlier segment. I think that's the way that I'm gonna try to go. All right, got my dots and fingers here, and we can try to knock down that little glare with using one of these fingers, which these fingers have different densities which block different levels of light. So depending on how much light I want to block will determine which finger I use. And I don't know right out of the gate. I'm going to have to try a few of them and see. The other thing that I can do is try to put a second layer of diffusion between my first layer and the subject, and that might do enough to knock down that highlight a little bit. Before we get into the dots and fingers, let's give that a shot and see if that works. So this is just the same material that is on this roll of Rosco. It's Rosco 3008 Tough Frost. I've gaff taped a little bit of armature wire on the edges just to give it a little bit of rigidity. So it'll stand up by itself, hopefully. I don't want to have it in the scene because I really like my composition here. Although I'm going to cut it out after the fact, I just want to make sure that it doesn't overlap on top of my product. If it's on the edge of the product and we see it, that's not going to be a problem because we are knocking this out in post, but you got to make sure that anything else you put into the scene isn't between your lens and the product, or else you're going to be covering part of what it is that you're shooting. So I'm going to get this as close as I can here, and let's see if I can dial this in. I don't know if this is going to work. We may have to go to a couple fingers. Let's see. Let's take a shot and see what we get here. That helped. That did pretty much what I wanted it to. So I'm happy with that. We're going to leave that and go with that. So now I have my edges lit. I can tell what's there. I have a nice highlight along that edge, which kind of mirrors the highlight across that back edge. And so now I just need to get some light into the front of this subject. I think that I've got a couple ways to do this. I can either bring a bounce card in from the front and try to pick up some of the light that's coming from behind and bounce back into the product, or I can add another flash. I think by adding another flash, I might be able to get a gradient up this side of the product, which I think would be really cool. Let's see if we can do that fairly quickly. You don't want to spend too much time trying to dial in a catalog shot because it's not going to be cost effective for you or for your client.